Hey guys, this is my second commander for the deck theory building for commander. It's God Eternal Bontu. He is 3 colorless, 2 black, so it's a mono black commander. He is a legendary creature zombie god with menace. When he enters the battlefield, you can sacrifice any number of other permanents and then draw that many cards. And then when he dies, he's or is put into exile from the battlefield. You may put it into the owner's library, third from the top. So it's just a good way that you could also just instead of paying high commander tax for them, you could also just put them third from the top of your library and just pay the 5 again from hand. Some notable cards in here. I mostly put Liliana in here mainly for the draw, but she's also Liliana Dreadhorde General is just a really strong planeswalker. 4 colorless, 2 black. Whenever a creature you control dies, draw a card. Her +1 ability is a 2/2. Create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. -4. Each player sacrifices 2 creatures, and the -9. Each opponent chooses a permanent they control of each permanent type and sacrifice the rest. Which is I think it was Primordial Gear Hulk, the mono white creature. That when it enters, each player chooses a permanent type. So this is mostly a token deck, but also with heavier on the creating zombie tokens. So some big token generators like Abhorrent Overlord, Underworld Hermit, Chittering Witch, Endrick Sahar, Master Breeder, Ghoulcaller Gisa is very useful if you need to kill your commander as well. It's more on the top end, but Josu Vice, a Lich Knight, which is 2 colorless, 2 black, legendary creature zombie knight, kicker, 5 colorless and a black, which is in total 10 mana in order to get in total 8 2/2 black zombie knight creature tokens with menace. I understand if you probably don't want to spend that kind of money, but typically black will have ways to just deal with all of that, so there's you wouldn't really have to worry. So, and then there's also Pawn of Ulamog. So, since you're sacking a lot of permanents you control, you could get extra tokens to be able to use for it. For win conditions in this deck, there is Grey Merchant of Asphodel or Gary. Since there's going to be a decent amount of recursion in this deck as well, like Relentless Dead and a few instances sorceries I'll go over. Other token generators like Grave Titan, when enters or attacks, create 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. Tormod, the Desecrator, and that's pretty much about it. And that everything else buffs up zombies you control. So like Lord of the Cursed, Lord of the Undead, and I believe that's it. I also threw in Cryptghast as a way just to have pretty much a mana doubler. So you can, if you're just getting bad draw on your lands, but you have Cryptghast out, you could keep up with some of the green players as well. I also threw in Diregraph Colossus, which enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each zombie card in your graveyard. Whenever you cast a zombie spell, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield tapped. So just another way for you to create a bunch of black tokens just to sack off to your commander. I also threw in Razorlash Transmogrant just as a way for you to have a graveyard recursion, so you have a creature to recur just to help the sack. I threw in Mycaeus as well for the fact that you're mostly running zombies, so you're running non-humans, and it's just an easy way for you to, let's say you just decide to sack your whole board. You won't get the tokens back, but you'll get all your other creatures back. I also threw in Headless Rider, which is just the same thing as Diregraph, but instead of casting, it's whenever he or another non-token zombie you control dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. And then Solemn Simulacrum is also pretty decent in the deck, just due to the fact that you can ramp with it, and also when it dies, you may draw a card, so it will just draw you 2 cards as well. For part of recursions, I also threw in Rot Hulk, which is A pretty new card. When it enters, return up to X target zombie cards from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the number of opponents you have. So typically, by the time you get him out, hopefully there's still 3 players still in play. So that's 3 creatures that you can return. Going down to sorceries, it is mostly going to be a lot of board wipes, but also a few graveyard recursions as well. There is Army of the Damned, which is just to create a bunch of 2/2 zombie tokens for you to sack and draw off of. Bitter Ordeal, funny enough, when I saw this card, I thought it was absolutely hilarious. Is it good? In my opinion, no. It's more of a Disneyland card that if you have the setup for, you could just essentially just win the game off casting it. So what Bitter Ordeal does is it's 2 colorless and a black. Search target player's library for a card and remove that card from the game, then shuffle then shuffle their library. Gravestorm. Whenever you play this spell, copy it for each permanent put into a graveyard this turn. You may choose new targets for the copies, which I will go a little bit further into some of the connections that could make this really good. But for now, you can understand the fact that you're sacking a bunch of permanents and drawing cards off it. It can be a good also just to remove the other players' win conditions from their decks and just remove them from the ability to have a harder time from winning the game. Bubbling Muck, just High Tide, but for black. That's it. That's all it is. Dark Salvation. I have not had enough chances to use this card, so I don't know exactly how good it is, but all it is it's 2x and a black. Target player creates X 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. Then up to 1 target creature gets -1/-1 until the end of turn for each zombie that player controls. Would I say it's probably good because the only way you could remove something off another player's board is if you give them 2/2s behind it, but it's also could be used for you if you need to kill your commander to draw even more off of. Because it says target player and then you choose a creature. So you just need to get enough to where you would have to pay 6 in total for each X, so that's 12 mana, so that's in total 13 mana just to remove your commander. But it also does create a bunch of tokens behind it, so it's not too bad. Is it good? No. If you're playing against a bunch of other slow decks, it should be fine. Forever Young is just to recur creatures, pretty much, which it does work with Tormod, the Desecrator, because the creatures are leaving your graveyard. So you put any number of target creature cards from your graveyard on top of your library, and then you draw a card. Of course, you can order those creatures as it's resolving, so you could draw the one that you want to draw right off the bat. I threw Mutilate in here for a board wipe, just due to the fact that you're playing mono black and you're running a lot of swamps. So -1/-1 is the best removal. That's why Toxic Deluge is so good, because it goes around all the indestructible counters and anything else that could help prevent you from board wiping. Rise of the Dark Realms, a game ender card. It's one of your big splashy spells. It's just meant when you play this card, hopefully you're winning the game soon, unless not someone board wipes. But that's pretty much the reason why you run Rise of the Dark Realms. If for those people who don't know, Rise of the Dark Realms is put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. It is 7 colorless and 2 black, so it's highly expensive, but typically that's the kind of stuff you want from your mostly expensive cards. As for instants, I have it as a mix of removal and also recursion as well. So I run Baleful Mastery. So if you guys, it's more of a budget card in a way. So if you don't have the mana to run, the money to run Deadly Rollick, you can run Baleful Mastery, which is, its main cost is 3 colorless and a black, but typically you're going to pay for the alternate cost it has, which is 1 and a black. So essentially it's a little bit worse of a Swords to Plowshares, but when you pay the alternate cost, an opponent you can choose an opponent to draw a card. So if someone's so you could always choose the person that's not doing much or behind, just so then you can have another player for them to focus on. And then what it does is exile a target creature or planeswalker. So it does hit planeswalkers. So if you ever do have that Super Friends deck that someone decides to play at your table, you could just exile their planeswalker. Carrion is a good way to just sack your commander and create a bunch of tokens behind it, so then you can sack them later for draw. Culling the Weak, same thing. Just to sack a creature, gain 4 black. Same thing for to help to just do stuff with your commander. Defile, it's kind of like Mutilate, but it's a single target. It's 1 black. Target creature gets -1/-1 until the end of turn for each swamp you control. Force of Despair, it is a good removal, in my opinion. So if it's not your turn, you may exile a black card from your hand rather than pay the spell's mana cost. So instead of paying 1 colorless and a 2 black, you could just essentially just kind of force a will this and just exile a black card from your hand and destroy all creatures that enter the battlefield this turn. So if someone's like comboing off, you can do this to just remove all those immediate threats. Rise of the Dread Marn is useful for board wipe stuff. So if you ever get board wiped, you could just do this and create a number of black black zombie berserkers, whereas X is the number of non-token creatures that died this turn. Sacrifice is just used to, like the Carrion, sack your commander, which will help spend the mana cost to cast it. Sheoldred's Edict, I think this is a very good removal because it makes people sacrifice. And not many people are running the what is it, Selesnya commander that prevents you from sacrificing, which you have to choose one. Each opponent sacrifices a non-token creature, each opponent sacrifices a creature token, or each opponent sacrifices a planeswalker. Typically, you're going to be running one of the first two. You're most likely going to be always choosing sacrifice a non-token creature, unless not someone's running some form of a clone deck. Then you might want to choose the creature token if they do that. Snuff Out is in another way like Baleful Mastery, but a little bit worse due to the fact that you don't exile and it only targets non-black creatures. But if you control a swamp, which most likely you are, instead of paying the 3 colorless and a black, you could just pay 4 life, which black is known for just paying life to just do stuff, rather than pay the spell's mana cost and just destroy target non-black creature and it can't regenerate. Songs of the Damned is a very useful. It's a ritual. You add black mana to your mana pool for each creature in your graveyard. So this is very useful either after a board wipe or after you sack a bunch of things to your commander. You could pay. You could play this and get a bunch of black mana to do stuff. Thrilling Encore. I just recently noticed this card and I thought it was one of the most interesting cards. So it does something like Rise of the Dreadmarn, but instead of creating a bunch of tokens, you can actually, it's like a mix of the Rise of the Dreadmarn and Rise of the Dark Realms. So you put onto the battlefield under you control all creature cards in all graveyards that were put there from the battlefield this turn. So if someone board wipes and you have the mana open for this, you can cast this and just take everyone's creatures. In which thusly someone's going to have to board wipe again, which is unlikely. For mana rocks, or at least for artifacts, I run mostly mana rocks, but there's also the typical like the sack artifacts in here. So one of the mana rocks I run Arcane Signet. Now I know some people question should you run an Arcane Signet inside a monocolored deck, but if you're tapped out on lands and you need the black mana, it could be useful. There's also Crowded Crypt, which also helps create black tokens, those zombie tokens. So whenever a creature you control dies, put a corpse counter on this artifact, and then you pay 4 and 2 black. sacrifice the artifact and create the number of 2/2 black zombie creature tokens for the number of corpse counters on Crowded Crypt. Acre of Wellsprings is when it ETBs or enters the battlefield or is put into the graveyard, draw a card. Jet Medallion is just to use to reduce your black spells. Mephetic Draught does something like Ichor Wellspring, but you just lose a life. Mycosynth Wellspring searches for you, allows you to tutor. It's like a solemn, but it puts it to your hand instead of the battlefield, which works as well. It's also pretty good because it's when it ETBs and also when it dies. Nimble Right Schematic. Pretty much, it's gonna. When I say it's the same thing as like Ichor Wellspring and Mycosynth Wellsprings, is whenever they ETB or dies, it will do something. So this one will create a 1/1 colorless construct artifact token. Just another thing to to draw off of. Prize Statue creates treasure tokens. Servo Schematics will create 1/1 colorless servos. Soul Ring, everyone knows Soul Ring. I don't think I need to explain it. It's in every precon, so you could always find one. Throne of Eldraine is actually, say, very useful for this deck, because, like I said earlier, with like Song of the Dam or Cryptghast, is that if you're not getting super lucky on your mana drops, this taps for 4 mana of any chosen color. So you're going to be choosing black, and you can only cast monocolored spells. Well, you're a monocolored deck, so that's what you're going to be casting. Or you can spend 3 mana to draw 2 cards. You can only use the mana of the color that you chose to activate the ability. Monocolored deck, so there's going to be no problem. Vat of Rebirth is whenever another artifact or creature you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, put an oil counter on it. If you pay 2 and a black, remove 4 oil counters from Vat of Rebirth, and it's just a recursion effect. You will just return target creature card from the graveyard. You can only activate it as a sorcery, but majority of the time it's going to be, a lot of them are going to be sorcery abilities anyways. And Wand of Orcus is just used to create more 2/2 black zombie tokens. But it is a 2 colorless black legendary artifact equipment. Whenever equipped creature attacks or blocks it, and zombies you control gain death touch until the end of turn. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, create that many 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. So it's just used to create more tokens. As for enchantments, Black Market is in here because you're sacking a bunch of creatures. So it's just going to pump up Black Market even higher. So if it's not dealt with, you're going to be having a lot of black mana on your pre-combat main phase, so your first main phase. Blight Mound is just another token generator, but it gives attacking pests you control +0 +1 +0, my bad, and have Menace. And whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token, and then when the pest dies, you gain 1 life. Curse of Disturbance. Whenever enchanted player is attacked, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token, and it will do the same thing for whoever attacked it or attacked that player. So you can utilize whenever other players attack your opponents, you can have this create you tokens as well. So you gain the most amount of benefit because that's more sack fodder. Curse of the Restless Dead. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under enchanted player's control, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed. So if you have a landfall deck or a green player in your pod, just give this to them. You're going to be loaded with zombies if it's not removed. And then, as you can also see for some of the more seasoned players who might know these cards, I run Grave Pact and Dictative Erebos. They do essentially the same thing, but Dictative Erebos has Flash, and Dictative Erebos is 3 colorless and 2 black, and whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. And so, as earlier with Bitter Ordeal, if you have Dictative Erebos or Grave Pact out when you sack all your permanents, you're going to force opponents to sacrifice, and then we'll go look at Bitter Ordeal. The key thing is Gravestorm for the Bitter Ordeal combo. Whenever you copy it for each permanent put into a graveyard this turn. So when you force other players to sack their permanents and put them into their graveyards, it is just essentially helping you out with Bitter Ordeal. It's just going to win you the game. Endless Rank of the Dead. At beginning of your upkeep, you create X 2/2 black zombie creature tokens, where X is half the number of zombies you control rounded down. Like I said earlier, this deck is just meant creating a bunch of tokens, sacking them, and drawing cards. Funeral. So this is a room. So there's the Funeral Room and Awakening Hall. So Funeral Room is 2 and a black to open that. So if anyone's confused about how rooms work, there's two separate costs. Whenever you look at the card, the mana value is actually going to be combined. So if you have, let's say, Up the Beanstalk, and you cast, if you cast this room, but for the Funeral Room cost, it will still look at the mana value as 5 or greater because Awakening Hall is 8 mana. So you can still draw the card off that. So for future people who want to run that, that's how the mana value works for the rooms. And typically is when you want to cast a spell, you have to open up one of the rooms first. So typically you're going to open up the Funeral Room first because it's just the cheapest. It's 2 colorless and a black. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. It's just an aristocrat ability, so then you could also win that way off that too. So you could just sack a bunch of your creatures and just start draining people for a bunch of life. And then Awakening Hall is when you unlock this door, return all creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it's just a mass graveyard recursion. So it just is just another way to for you to be able to do more stuff as you go on. Grave Pact, like I said earlier, is like Dictate of Erebos, but instead of being 3 colorless and 2 black, it's actually 1 colorless and 3 black. So as for a mono black deck, it doesn't really matter about how many pips you have to use for it. But like if you're playing a 2-color deck, it might affect it a little bit. But same thing, whenever a creature you control dies, each other player sacrifices a creature. Open the graves. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. And then Oversold Cemetery is 1 colorless and a black. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 4 or more cards in your graveyard, you may return a target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So essentially, this is more of like a late game recursion. When you start stacking a bunch of your creatures, you can start returning things that you're going to need back to your hand. So it's very useful. If you don't want to run this and you want to run Phyrexian Reclamation, I believe that's the other one that recurs, you can as well. I just did this because you're not paying a whole lot of life to recur creatures. But if you know how to do life resource management and all that, perfectly fine. That's a good replacement as well. As for lands, I run both Cabal Coffers and Cabal Stronghold, just as ways for you to just produce a bunch of mana. Because you're not playing like a green deck, so you don't have all that ramp, and it also could help you pay for late game spells as well early on. Now, the difference between Cabal Coffers and Cabal Stronghold is Cabal Coffers looks at for each swamp you control. Cabal Stronghold only looks at basic swamps you control, which for a monocolor deck you're looking at a bunch of basics. But if you have Urberg, Tomb of Yawgmoth out, which transforms all lands that have the swamp let me rephrase that. Each land is a swamp in addition to its other types, so everything could tap for black. So it will turn Unholy Grotto, Reliquary Tower, and Mortuary Mire, as well as Cabal Coffers and Cabal Stronghold into swamps. So Cabal Coffers is actually going to net you more mana with Urberg than Cabal Stronghold will, but since you're running a bunch of basics, you're still going to be netting a decent amount with Cabal Stronghold, so it's always just a decent backup. The only another difference is Cabal Stronghold taps for colorless, and it costs 1 more to activate to get those black for each basic swamp you have. So it costs 3 and you tap it. Cabal Coffers is tap 2, or you pay 2, tap it, and then add black for each swamp you control. For Mortuary Mire and Witch's Cottage, they're just used as land graveyard recursion. So Mortuary Mire is it enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters, you may put target creature card from your graveyard on top of your library. and it taps for black. Reliquary Tower. So since you're drawing a whole lot, and you kind of want to, and if you switch it to more of a graveyard recursion deck, you could probably remove Reliquary Tower and just start discarding cards because you can recur them. But with this version is that there is graveyard recursion, but there isn't as great. So it's best just to keep your cards in hand so you may not so you're not discarding something that you might need later. Unholy Grotto is another form of graveyard recursion. A lot of the graveyard recursion actually puts the cards on top of your library. So it's not as powerful as some others as putting it directly to your hand or onto the battlefield. But since you do draw a lot, it could also slow down you just pretty much just milling yourself out so you don't draw and then with an empty deck and lose the game. And the Witch's Cottage is that it can only put the creature on top of your library if it enters the battlefield untapped, which you need 3 or more other swamps. And it's a swamp itself, so it will count towards Cabal Coffers. But it's not a basic swamp, so it won't count towards Cabal Stronghold. This is one of my, I'd say, favorite style decks. I started playing Magic more during the War of the Sparks era, and this was like one of the first legendaries I got, besides Liliana Dreadhorde General. So this is like some pet cards in here for this. But if you do enjoy some of these different style decks, please do like and subscribe. I will try to go more in depth with some of these less played commanders, and hopefully get more flavor out there because I know a lot of players are playing some new commanders, which they do look cool and all that, but in my opinion, they do way too much. I kind of miss these old commanders that kind of just do one thing or focus on one thing. So, but this is pretty much the deck tech. The main way to win this is trying to outvalue your opponents, kind of like the other deck that I did earlier. But there's some bigger win conditions like Rise of the Dark Realms. If you also want to throw in some of like the Blood Artist and all that because you're sacking a lot of creatures, you can. You can go switch away from the zombie theme and remove all the lords for the zombies and throw in like Zulaport Cutthroat, Blood Artist, and all those kinds of cards. But for now, the way this deck is, I think it works perfectly fine. And if you do enjoy this kind of deck, I will post the Moxfield link down below in the description so then you can have it for yourself. And if you guys ever get confused on how to copy it, I can always show that to you guys in a later video. But I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. And I hope you do like and subscribe these kinds of videos. I do enjoy talking about these decks I make because I try to get as creative as possible. And yeah, thank you for watching.